Welcome to the first episode of the Ordeals of Abstraction. It is reported that late in Karl Popper's life, he was approached by some students of his, and they asked him to comment on Heidegger, to which he replied, can we please forget about Heidegger? Now that is a wish I have had at times, but there's a sense in which one can only forget it if one has a clear enough grasp of the thought. Dr. Westerlund's lucid and fascinating work, Heidegger and the Problem of Phenomenality, I believe is a significant contribution to the field of Heideggerian scholarship and to the history of ideas. And it should at least help me in my aim of possibly forgetting Heidegger at some point in the future. We can perhaps begin by asking Dr. Westerlund what is meant by phenomenality or the problem of phenomenality.
Well, in this book I define it very broadly. I mean, as basically the question, how do things show up as meaningful phenomena? What is, on account of what structure do we experience things as meaningful phenomena, as persons, as animals, as chairs, etc., etc. I mean, that's basically, a phenomenon is just a meaningful thing that's there for me. So that's the problem of phenomena, and I use it as a kind of, let's say, Heidegger would call it a formal indication, so that we present this problem, although it is not yet clearly defined in the beginning of the book. Rather, it gets its meaning also from the way we actually try to formulate it. So it's a beginning for this study, and I think it's a problem that in different forms has engaged philosophers both on both sides of the continental divide, as it were. And phenomenology, the movement, is of course occupied by it from beginning to end.
But when I first encountered that broad definition, immediately my thoughts went to a definition of information, which is, if I'm not mistaken, attributed to Gregory Bateson, where he defines information as a difference that makes a difference. Yeah? But that's also very broad. But I think that's sort of an account where you seek to explain how things become significant. Yeah? So a difference in the outside world which makes a difference to me. Like I would look, let's say, at a painting and something stands out. Or I'm sitting in a bus and then a certain sound, let's say, scratching of a plastic envelope behind me stands out and makes a difference to whatever datum of in which I had previously been or sunk. I had been sunk in. But I have a feeling that again you can maybe say these would be definitions or accounts which are within natural sciences, and I have a feeling that all of them, they differ maybe from the way phenomenologists attempted to approach the problem, in this sense that they do not expect the mechanism by which these meaningful significances are produced to be apparent or to be given in, let's say, what you reflect on. Basically, your stream of conscious thought or whatever thoughts you observe or reflect on. That they do not believe that sort of reflection can give you an account of how things come to be meaningful and significant. Am I right in pointing to this as being the difference of how phenomenologists approach it versus people in other disciplines?
I think you are, if I understand you correctly. I mean, basically, there is divide, let's say, in how you approach the matter, where naturalists, for example, of different sorts, but also analytical philosophers who are mostly naturalists, but not only them, they basically approach the question from a third person angle, as it were, which means that we look at you from the side, as it were. You're having this experience, and then we are trying to, then explanation or understanding means basically seeing how the causality works here.
Exactly.
What is it that what kinds of things are there that hit your eye, as it were, and how do we then construct from that basic sensual data some form of meaningful world? But from the the phenomenologist basically sets out from the idea that we have to start with the first person experience. So we have to start with my experience of the book, of the giraffe, or whatever. That's the basic starting point for everything. Because the idea is that it is only this experience that actually gives us access to meaning. And then what we do, or then the idea is that what understanding is here. It's basically figuring out what the structure of this experience is. What are the as it were, the basic, the central elements of this experience? What needs to be there in order for this experience to be what it is? But all of this is done, so to speak, within the first person perspective.
Again, where do they derive their justification for this assumption? That the structure of experience itself, or what I'm lucky enough to be conscious of, not only just conscious of, but that my later reflection will also still retain, that in itself is sufficient enough as an explanation of how it came that this and that became significant or meaningful. So where is the justification for their belief that the structure of experience itself can reveal to me why certain things become meaningful? Because again, a naturalist would have no problem in pointing to the fact that so much of what happens in terms of information processing in the brain is not available to conscious reflection. And if you happen to be even one of those group of cognitive scientists who are sort of borderline epiphenomenalists, they would say that consciousness is just some sort of surplus movie that you're lucky enough to have, access to, and that many of what happens in terms of decision making you're not even conscious of, which is in fact not untrue. So can we now, given the level of progress we have in neuroscience, still hold faith in the fact that just reflection of the structure of experiences can reveal enough about how things become significant or meaningful?
I think it can, but it depends on the question we are interested in. I think. I mean, if you're interested in explaining why, for example, or let's say what the mechanisms in the brain are that sustain different kinds of experiences, then of course you have to look at the brain. I mean, that's clear. Or if you want to know how the norms or values or whatever have developed historically, the norms and values that now happen to guide, let's say, our experiences of shame, then you have to trace that historical development, which is not a phenomenological task. So,
which is not, or which is?
which is not a phenomenological
The
task.
historical tracing of how a person comes to feel shame.
No, I wouldn't call that a phenomenological task.
Okay.
I think that
But
can be done by the sociologist.
Perhaps you're in need of clarification, please,
Yeah.
because there is a way in which the term historical is used by phenomenologists, which
Yeah.
for an outsider may not be clear enough, because oftentimes we hear historical, we think about different epochs, but there is also the history of, let's say, individual subjects' time in the world from maybe his birth and through his experiences. And is it the case that sometimes when we use the word historical, we mean the history of, let's say, things that have happened which have left a trace in the memory of, let's say, what is significant or otherwise to an individual? So when you use the word historical right now, do you mean historical in the grand sense or in this phenomenological sense, which I may have misunderstood or understood?
Now I used it
Okay, in the
as,
grand
as a
sense.
name for
Mm.
in the grand sense, that this is a name for development on the level of
Society.
ideologies, ideas,
Yeah.
structures of society, and
Mm.
so on. But of course, there is the same kind of, you can do the same kind of differentiation, I think, when it comes to analyzing personal history. But you know, because these things are very entangled all the time, that's perhaps what makes it easy, hard to make the distinctions. I mean, although I think they are very different, these approaches, because on the one hand, you can do a phenomenological analysis, let's say, of the historical structure of phenomena. That's basically what Heidegger does in Being and Time, so that he, through a kind of phenomenological reflection on our experience, he tries to show that this experience exhibits the kind of radical historicist structure where the world, the pre-understanding of the historical world that we live in, determine what we will experience as meaningful phenomena. But that's still a phenomenological analysis, although the outcome of it is that Dasein, or the human being, is radically historical. But of course, if that's the outcome, then that opens up the need for different kinds of historical analysis.
Which then would not necessarily be phenomenological.
Exactly.
But perhaps you can here also just zoom in on what is one of the central, let's say, points of investigation in your thesis, where you trace two dominant interpretations of how Heidegger tackled the problem of phenomenality. Maybe you would like to name them and talk about them at some length. If I'm not, or if I can remember correctly, these two are the transcendental phenomenological approach and the hermeneutic historical approach. Or did I name them correctly?
Well, I use the words
Yeah.
transcendental, phenomenological, and I think hermeneutic, deconstructive.
Indeed. Yeah.
Although you could call the latter one just historicist. I
Historicist,
thought
yeah.
about
Yeah.
using that term. But yeah, basically, this was a way of, let's say, setting up the scene for my own investigations and a way of trying to get some order in the extremely vast secondary literature. But I do think there is some point in this divide.
Yeah.
So yeah, on the one hand, there has been, let's call it, transcendental phenomenological interpretation of Heidegger, which basically reads Heidegger as a transcendental phenomenologist. That is to say, as an heir to Husserl. The idea is that Heidegger basically develops Husserl's phenomenological approach further. So what he does is that he uses the phenomenological method in the way that he looks at our experiences, reflects on them, tries to tease out their basic structures, and these basic structures are basically universal and necessary. That is the idea. That's what we do, and the idea is that Heidegger, at least the young Heidegger and the early Heidegger, that this is his basic way of doing philosophy. And then we have the other, the hermeneutic, the constructive interpretation, which basically thinks that no, the central thing in Heidegger is that he breaks with Husserl's idea that we can do some kind of phenomenological investigation that relies on a kind of direct intuitive access to our experience. So the idea is that Heidegger's analysis of the structure, or the historical structure of phenomenality, kind of prompts him to develop another kind of thinking, which the task of which it is to analyze through some kind of historical analysis, hermeneutic, deconstructive, whatever, tries to analyze the historical sense formations, let's call them that, that always already determine how all our experiences are constituted. And that means that you have to renounce every reliance on direct seeing, direct intuition, and instead engage in another kind of radical historical investigation. Of course, yeah.
No, there's two questions I have here. First, I'm curious to know where your sympathies lie in terms of which of these two approaches do you think are more valid? Besides that, also, let's say, if we stay with the first one, where which also there is another term for it that you have described in your thesis, the myth of the given. Yeah, where I have this faith that while just that intuitive reflection of what is intuitively given, and this pre-theoretical, you can say maybe understanding, if there is at all such a thing, that some things, reveal themselves, which otherwise, if I adopt, for example, what is called the natural attitude, where I even assume that there are objects in the world, that already clouds my access. First, the question is, like, where are your sympathies in terms of the use value of this one versus the later development? And because even in this first approach, transcendental phenomenological approach, there are some differences with Husserl. And also there is this introduction of already there, the present at hand and ready to hand. So would you like to zoom in on that? First declare your sympathies, which one do you sympathize more with? And also, how did this distinction come about? Because to the best of my understanding, this is not really present in Husserl, this distinction of Zuhandenheit and what's the other one?
Presence at hand.
In German.
Vorhandenheit.
Vorhandenheit,
yeah. Yeah.
So first, your sympathies, and how did this come about in Heidegger's tackling?
Yeah, I'm not perhaps quite sure what you're after with the Zuhandenheit, Vorhandenheit, but let me begin with the my sympathies.
Yeah.
But as you said in the beginning, I mean, it's you cannot forget and you cannot sympathize without trying to understand what you're doing. So that's why I'm not sympathizing with anything, but I do think that the phenomenological enterprise, if we put it that way, in some very let's say, general way or basic way, let's put it that way, is, I do believe that kind of enterprise, that way of doing philosophy is absolutely central to understanding anything. That is to say, the approach that sets out from our first person experiences and try to analyze what's actually happening there. But I also think that this approach is all but clear and it's very difficult. I don't think, I'm not very satisfied with Husserl's way of articulating that enterprise. And there are a lot of problems in Heidegger also. So it's kind of an idea that has to be clarified in itself and somehow developed. So in a sense my sympathies are there, but they are not there with some kind of ready phenomenon, that is to say some kind of standpoint, Husserl or Heidegger or anything like that. But I do think that when we try to understand different things of our lives, I mean, let's take an experience like shame, for example. I do think that if we want to understand what happens there, we need to go into that experience, our own, let's say, via literature or whatever, talking to our friends, and try to see what is it that is so important in my shame, for example. How do I look at the world? How do I look at the others? How do I understand myself in that kind of experience? If you don't do this, you will actually not have a very good grasp of what you're talking about at all.
Except, sorry to interrupt, but
yeah, no problem.
I mean, besides just reflection, there are these other claims made about this method, and this is why I wanted to shift it to this ready to hand and presence at hand. Because starting with Husserl, there is this radical claim that I'm bracketing almost everything. I'm not allowing for any assumptions to come in. Yeah, so I can't even start to believe that there is a world with things in it, objects in it. So, and then there's a whole, how would you say? There's volumes written about how it is that we are going to undertake this, and that how it is that, for example, phenomenology is different from descriptive psychology. Now, anytime there is any, for example, insight of words, it is really no different, at least to me, from descriptive psychology. And there's also this claim made by Heidegger that there is this way of seeing the world where things are present at hand, and there's this other way that I think, Heidegger claims to think that is more primary or significant or primordial, or did he say that? I don't really know the word, but he places this above, and this is the ready to hand, where I do not talk of objects which would have coordinates in space and time, but I talk about, let's say, maybe fields of intensity which have more or less significance to the way I'm engaged in the world. And then the question comes that, okay, supposing there is such a thing as he claims, what are the fruits of this other way of viewing things where I only describe things in this manner, in the ready-to-hand manner? And now, maybe it's a bit hasty, but since time is running out, I'm somehow compelled to make a reference to this, because apparently Ernst Cassirer wrote a criticism of this very distinction with reference to what was then maybe proto-neuroscientific investigation of aphasia, where a person has lost his ability to maybe make sentences or name things, but that person still had a sense of orienting himself in the world, knowing where a certain object should be. And Cassirer points to this and says that, okay, the difficulty in building a predicated sentences, which to him are the very vehicle for somehow an understanding of objects, or what he calls objective displacement. So, insofar as I can make sentences, it already presupposes that I know what an object is, because the structure of sentence or sentence making or speaking of language presupposes that I have an understanding, and this understanding is the ready to hand. Is the presence to hand, or the, which one was it in German? Or and the very fact that he points to this, it's maybe also some sort of a criticism where he says that this Heideggerian ideal is really the universe of a person suffering from aphasia, who can orient himself in the world but cannot talk of it or construct sentences, because the very minute we employ language, we already have adopted all these presuppositions that the phenomenologists initially wanted to bracket out. So we cannot talk of experiences without already presupposing the natural attitude, because to speak is to already have an understanding of the presence at hand.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure that I
Okay,
follow
sorry.
you, but I'm and it seems to me that at least it sounds like Cassirer's critique is a bit misguided. I mean, because I mean, it's saying that this is meeting at something ready to hand. This book, I mean, it basically means that it's there as an object of use. It's something that is meaningful to me, that has a certain role in all my projects, etc., that I can handle. It's not there as an object somehow out of context that I'm staring at or trying to calculate, which is the way we, according to Heidegger, encounter presence at hand objects. I mean, there's a big debate about what he means by presence at hand, and I won't go into that, but I do think that I mean, saying that things primarily encounter me or meet me as ready to hand entities, that does not remove any of the concreteness of the things. It's not that they would not be objects, they are just a particular kind of meaningful objects, if we use that word in a generous sense, which have this role, which are laden with meaning, etc., etc. So it's hard to see why that kind of experience would not be a perfect ground for forming any kinds of sentences about things relating to things in different ways.
If you remember when you were tracing Heidegger's development, early development,
Yeah.
there was this point where you brought the new Kantian criticisms of Husserl's project from Nathorp and Bicker.
Yes.
And I think they broadly were based on the problem of how do you discuss this, or the description, and what was the other one? Let me check here. That whenever we reflect on the stream, insofar as we want to talk about any bit of it, that bit already becomes an object of investigation.
Yes.
So this idea, which was not put forward first by Heidegger but by Husserl, that there is a way in which we can be submerged in this and still, come out and then talk about it later to other people, and abandon whatever methods, let's say, Gestalt psychologists would have used to describe the same thing. Because in the beginning, at least, they make these claims about how rigorous they are as opposed to what happens in psychology at the same time.
Yeah.
Which is at least more clear, or in its objective of, okay, I pursue this sensation or that sensation. And there are these causal accounts, as you say, and even descriptive accounts of the phenomena itself, or what follows the other. And their claim is that, we are bracketing all of this, and then ours is a different enterprise. And then another, for example, points to this out, that I cannot, talk of this without it becoming an object of investigation. And also, insofar as I want to discuss it, then also, to use his word, in reflectively observing our pre-theoretical experience, we make the experience into an object, and in describing, we make use of generalizing and subsuming concepts, which transfer this factical temporal movement of pre-theoretical life into examples of general universal concepts and categories. Now, you disagree with him. Yeah, and not only you do, but Heidegger also does, in a sense that he uses this to attack Husserl, but then claims that he's getting out of this problem of the description by use of what he calls formal indication, which is a non-objectifying indicatory expression. Is a formal indication which is non-objectifying at all possible? And can you recall some instances of this amazing tool, the formal indication, from Heidegger's work, which may have impressed you at all? That this formal indication really gets out of that conundrum or dilemma or problem that these neo-Kantians have pointed to.
Well, I don't think you have to search to find the formal indications in Heidegger. I think that's the basic way he uses language all the time. I think that this neo-Kantian criticism builds on a certain idea of language and knowledge, where the idea is that we always have this kind of general concepts that somehow determine what we can say, and then in some sense they determine what kind of object we are talking about. But Heidegger's idea about here is that if we are committed to a phenomenological investigation, then all the concepts that we might use, everything from sensuous experience to concepts to language to object, etc. All this language, all these concepts, all these words can only at the beginning be we have as it were to let their meaning be undecided, because we have all these concepts from the history of philosophy. We have them with us, but the phenomenological investigation means that now let's try to look what these the things that these concepts are trying to grasp, what these things actually look like. And if we just start by defining or taking some concepts, we will actually cut off the investigation from the beginning, saying, well, this concept of shame, no, it determines
can any account be devoid of concepts? I think, and just as an aid to make this even more formal, I am, with your permission, going to read something which Gilbert Ryle wrote. And I believe Gilbert Ryle's review of Being and Time is probably the first review in the Anglo-Saxon universe of Heidegger's work. And of course, he does praise it to some extent, but then he says the attempt to derive our knowledge of things from our practical attitude towards tools, for example, breaks down for to use a tool involves knowledge of what it is. So, and also what can be done with it. And you cannot have that knowledge, in the sense that you also, I mean.
But there are, sorry, can I clarify something? I mean, because it seems to me that these arguments are on different levels.
True.
On the one hand, Heidegger would agree that in using tools of different sorts, we are constantly guided by different sorts of pre-understanding conceptions. I mean, if we use concept in a sufficiently open manner by concepts, he would say, that's clear, and that's no problem, and I agree, of course. Everything else would be pretty ludicrous. So yeah, I have a certain understanding or concept of book, for example, and it's the way we here in this country, in this historical epoch, whatever, talk about these things and understand these things, and those concepts that, as it were, in a certain context, almost, let's say, are express or define the practice. I mean, they are very different from the sorts of concepts I may use philosophically to try to explicate a certain phenomenon, a certain feeling, a certain experience, which are descriptive and which can be more or less accurate, which can be more or less true, as it were. Those concepts, I mean, the philosophical concepts, I think, have a different kind of work to do, and that's why it's so important that we don't let ourselves be guided by them as some kind of prejudices that somehow dogmatically determine what we will see.
See, because I read this because I wanted to then jump into one example which Heidegger gives. But here, just to repeat again, or let's say, attitude towards tools already requires our knowledge of what these tools are for. And let's say, what I mean to point out that this presence at hand attitude is necessary for me to then be, let's say, lost in the ready to hand. And I cannot, any account of the ready to hand only comes later once, so once we've already have a decent enough understanding of the world in terms of the natural attitude. So the Dasein that Heidegger introduces in the way that he sees him, kind of engaged in this or that, is a Dasein which is definitely not a child and not somebody who has to learn about something step by step. It's maybe an adult philosopher with a certain, concerns about his work, complaints of his mother-in-law, or, maybe some leakage in his shoes. And in a sense, if he wants to just zoom in on his concerns at that moment, maybe a sort of talk of concerns and significances would have priority for him. But he gives, for example, this example of, I come into this lecture hall and I see this lectern, and of course, when I come in, I don't see an object of this and that dimension, this height. I'm not maybe concerned about the composition, let's say, the chemical composition of the material which is used to make the letter, and all right.
If I'm not a chemist looking for a good example.
Yeah, and then he then makes this claim that, oh, let's have a Senegalese come in. And of course, when he was making this example, I think he could probably assume that the person from Senegal would have no notion of what this object is for. And he would come inside the room and, then here's the claim that even for him, he would not, start his investigation of this in the manner of natural attitude, but he would be by the equipment strangeness of the lector. I thought that's bull, because yes, insofar as we've already learned how to use things, we forget about them. But whenever we encounter something novel, we proceed to break it down and maybe approach it, maybe not in a scientific way, but there's an investigation which requires that natural attitude for many of its elements. And this claim about that even for him, there is a certain ready-to-hand aspect of the lecture. Okay, maybe ready to hand that if somebody attacks him, maybe he would like to grab the lectern and hit them. So it has that tool aspect that it can be of use in that sense, or maybe you can jump over it and launch into some sort of a weird dance move insofar as he's not a professor of philosophy in Freiburg. But there are these claims about the primacy of this or that. And I think that most of these, they forget about the genesis of how something became a tool in the first place. So a design is never a child which has to learn to understand things and then process them bit by bit for them to become tool enough for the child. So this, I don't know if you would like to comment on it, that the Dasein, which is always described by Heidegger, is an adult, if not a philosopher, is an adult 20th century human being with a certain, let's say, level of education which allows him to be engaged in a certain way, to forget, let's say, the strangeness of many of the objects which he's already mastered.
Yeah, but I don't think that that Heidegger's Dasein that it's very dependent on being an adult. I mean, I don't think that this analysis of readiness to hand that's the important thing. I mean, I think the basic idea here is that what he tries to zoom in on is as it were, the way of relating to the world where we are somehow engaged, where we have some kinds of questions, interests, motives, in relation to which things show up with a certain meaning. That meaning might be just a question mark. It might be that, what is this? Should I do with this? What do they do with this kind of thing? I mean, I'm talking about the Senegalese, for example. So I don't think it's bull, personally. I mean, it seems to me that, he can ask all kinds of questions within this kind of, let's say, meaningful engagement. And I would say that's the kind of priority that Heidegger has in mind, that we can never, he thinks, and I do believe that on this point he's right, that we can never construct these kinds of meaningful things from just mere objectivities. I mean, as long as we...
but you have to start there in a way that without starting from mere objectivities, you can never get to an account of, the way a subject is engaged. Let's say any anthropologist which studies any society, of course, they do not have to always, start from scratch, and they would describe practices and how people are engaged, or how this simple plays this role or that function. And that account, maybe you can call it a sort of a ready-to-hand account of a society, and it's good enough, and it's anthropology. I describe people's functioning, and of course, usually there's this joke that what is the difference of anthropology and sociology, and the answer is that if the people you study are in mud huts, then it's anthropology. If they're in the cities, it's sociology. So there are sociological accounts of how people are engaged together and what is of concern to them and what is of worry. How is this philosophy in any sense? Because in cases where it has been most detailed or concise, these varieties of account have been in disciplines such as anthropology, and I think even Husserl did make some sort of, if not derogatory remark, but some sort of remark that many of Heidegger's works are a variety of anthropology, so did Gilbert Ryle and many other people.
Yeah.
So far as they were not like just dismissive of it, like, for example, Carnap or other analytical thinkers. But any anthropological account already, does not bother with natural explanations of things, coordinates, and what you may call, what would we call it? But let's say these other sort of elementary descriptions, because they speak to a crowd which already has that knowledge. So again, this the primacy of this versus that, I'm not entirely taken by it, but I want to know your opinion.
Yeah, because it seems to me that you have a certain idea of philosophy,
True,
with a
yeah.
certain kinds of explanations,
Yes.
count as somehow basic, and perhaps
Basic in
even.
the way that you need to
Yeah.
have those already to build something else on top of it.
And that's precisely the idea that I try to question.
Okay.
Because it seems to me that it's the other way around. That in order for those kinds of naturalist explanation to have any, let's say, relevance, they already have to build on certain conceptions of the experiences that we are talking about, that we can only understand through a kind of phenomenological engagement. That would be nice, and then you can say all sorts of things about the natural, let's call it correlate of these experiences. But for me, it's very hard to see that you add almost anything to your understanding of your phenomena, of the phenomena in question, by doing this. And as to the sociologist, I would say that, well, why are they not, there are philosophically interesting things done in sociology and anthropology,
Sure.
but what makes a lot of the texts philosophically not that interesting is, I think, that they basically don't do philosophy. They usually start from a certain metaphysical view of what human behavior is all about, often with many naturalist elements, by the way. So they start with a certain idea of what is shame, what are the basic features of a society, blah blah blah, and then they apply these schemas to different cultures as variations of the same metaphysical preconceptions. But they never, or seldom, let's put it that way, allow their own investigations to somehow feed back and question those frameworks as they start out from. Which means that they are basically not doing philosophy, they are just applying certain philosophical conceptions. As is also done when you do bad literary analysis.
So wait, because, and I think this is probably let's say Heidegger would say that, oh, this and that investigation moves away from what is originary, because by way of abstraction there's a loss of significance. And maybe somebody like Cassirer or Neil Content or maybe any scientist would say that it's exactly necessary for us to, you know, have this loss of subjective significance when we are doing an investigation, to be impartial, to not stay within some subjectivist viewpoint. And this loss of significance comes with an epistemic gain. And yes, in a way, you know, like let's, for example, there would be some sort of research project, and the results are, you know, like in their attempt to be objective, and by way of approaching some average of, for example, opinion, or, you know, okay, I do a survey and this is the survey result, and somebody would read the survey and say, oh, what is described in this survey has none of the vehemence which, for example, I would feel via this and that, and one can reply to this sort of a criticism that, so what, you know, insofar as we want to be objective, we have to forget and dilute these subjectivist sort of attachments, engagements, concerns, and it is not really the objective of a good enough inquiry to be chained to an individual's or a subject's, how would you term it, biases, or let's say concerns. And philosophy too, insofar as it wants to present an account which is not purely idealist and subjectivist. It has to escape from, you know, the viewpoint of a single person, because that person may end up, you know, with very unkosher political convictions. And for the moment that he has them, he believes them to be, you know, significant. And phenomenology too, in so far as it sinks into that subjectivist, how would you say, pool, would suffers from that epistemic loss.
Yeah, but
Did that make sense?
it makes sense. But I do think it's on the wrong track. I mean, I mean, from my point of view,
do not have time to focus on Herr Heidegger's politics, but
yeah, but I'd like to comment on this, because it seems to me that we are kind of talking, somehow not meeting, and it seems to me that you understand phenomenology, the fact that the phenomenology moves out from and bases itself, as it were, on our first-person experiences, that in some sense makes it subjective. And then, in order to avoid that, you want something objective, and you want naturalism, and you want science, and so on. And I think that is a misunderstanding, I think, of phenomenology, because it seems to me that, of course, we can have different kinds of prejudices, ideologies. We misunderstand ourselves all the time, and for different reasons, often quite emotional reasons, political reasons, moral reasons. But it seems to me that this is actually the challenge for philosophers, to try to see clearly what goes on in our lives without this kind of subjective prejudices. I don't think that taking the first person perspective is in itself subjectifying, although it ties everything, of course, to our human experience.
But wait,
Let me take an example. I mean, if I walk down the street now and then I suddenly do something incredibly stupid and people around me stare at me and I feel shame. I mean, to take this example, an experience of shame. Now, for me, understanding this experience means to try to see what happens in me, as it were. I mean, not any particular, not how does Fredrik Westerlund, what are the particular of this experience, you can do that also, but what are the basic things going on here? How do the others look for me in this experience? What is the significance of this audience staring at me? How do I look at myself, for example? Why is it that this look or gaze of the others kind of hits me so that I turn in on myself and see myself as somehow despicable?
And you think a natural description of how this came to be, namely a series of accounts of a personal life in a very crude behaviorist manner.
Yeah.
So you would have somebody like a Skinner tracing all the positive, negative reinforcements of a development process where somebody did this thing and that stare was followed by something else, and there is cluster of inputs, cluster of outputs, and then some accounts, let's say first person accounts that you think that a kind of natural investigation would be deficient in describing this?
Well, I think so. Yeah, I think that it in itself it would bring us almost nothing. I would actually say.
Well, because
but I
nothing.
Yeah.
Because
when it comes to understanding.
yeah, because again, when you say understanding, a phenomenological understanding, let's say you do a phenomenal investigation of this instance or instances of shame in your life. Yeah.
But it's not only that, because the moment I really understand something
Right.
In that situation, I will understand your shame also, and
Hopefully,
I think so, and I will, and my sense of what shame is all over the place will change.
But this already presupposes
If
that
not, then
everybody
I
else
don't
is
have
like
an
you.
understanding.
This already presupposes that there's a certain uniformity across the species of the mechanism by which this came to be.
Sure.
No, what I mean to say that ultimately in your phenomenological investigation of how this instance came to be shameful, there would be an account. There would be an account of a certain variety of staring, a certain variety of basically feedback from your environment. This could be people's behavior which caused it. This could be maybe even the fact that that day was a sunny day and that you were more likely to perspire, and then that fear of you sweating kind of also exaggerated the whole episode. And at the end of the day, this is a first person account of an instance. Yeah? And exactly when you say that there's a hope that this would also allow us to understand other people's shame, then I have to put this account alongside other accounts and arrive at an average. Now the person who then goes through, who wants to summarizes like thousands of accounts of shameful experiences, and let's say all of these are done in a very rigorous phenomenological manner, that's summing up. To then pass a verdict, that would not be phenomenology in a way, that because we cannot, as happy as we are in terms of what we feel about our access to that instant, that conviction alone cannot be the basis of a scientific approach to the problem. But just to come back to Heidegger and maybe to one concrete claim that he makes, and okay, not in terms of shame, but he has these claims about authenticity.
Yeah.
And there's this general formula that he keeps repeating over and over again, where a human being, a Dasein, once it reaches an understanding of its own most finitude, the fact that it's not going to be here forever, and that within this lifetime, whatever infinite potentialities he dreamed about what his life can be, that they're in a sense not plausible, and even his own most potentialities are contingent in many different ways. In the fact that he's born in this historical era, he's maybe in the middle of this society, with this sort of means at his disposal, and with a certain body, for example, which would maybe not allow him to be a ballet dancer or a NBA sort of superstar. Now then there's this jump that, okay, Dasein will, insofar as it understands that, then it would feel a certain anxiety, and that anxiety then would enable him to achieve some sort of authentic being in the world. Now, I was just, and this I mentioned before also in our correspondence, I made a reference to some random book by Paul Virgniaud, where he makes the claim that, no, even, and it's very counterintuitive, even when I heard it I thought it's false, but the claim goes that even an immortal person, absent the realization of its own most finitude, can be somehow historical, and historical in a way that sometimes Heidegger uses historical as also, a synonym of authentic, in a way that I can only be authentic when I'm historical. And here there's a claim that, even if we are immortal insofar as there is a before and after and an unrealized potentiality, there's always a chance for authenticity. Yeah? Anyway, I hear this claim and I'm like, is there any way in which either of them is more justified? And insofar as this claim is abstracted out of Herr Heidegger's phenomenological investigation, how is one to arrive at not a conclusion, but a way to resolve these counterclaims? Because here is a person who says that if a human being who has no understanding of his finitude can never be authentic, and then another person says, even an immortal person can very well be authentic. Of course, they may be using this force in a different way, but then the question arises that, does a person, for example, living in a conflict zone right now in, say, Syria, who's surrounded by death, would his minutes in a way be more authentic because he's forever not free from that anxiety versus, let's say, a professor of zoology living in Reykjavik in Iceland, very far from the Islamic State. And because these claims are again somehow drawn out of this phenomenological investigation of Dasein and Dasein's finitude. And is there any way that I can, using phenomenology, counter this? Or do I just, as a, let's say, natural scientist, say that, that's just a subjectivist claim, and there is no way that we can settle this because that's what he derived from his own, let's say, observation of his stream of consciousness.
Yeah, well, you see, I think...
Do correct me if I'm using words wrongly here, or...
Yeah, no, there's so much on the table, hard to know where to begin, but I think, I mean, first of all, I think there is no, I don't think there is any problem in principle, as it were, to try to, I mean, the first thing we would have to do here is, of course, trying to understand what Heidegger means by authenticity. And, I mean, for me, that's a concept that is very problematic. I think that analysis has great problems that Heidegger is perhaps not, in the end, does not quite understand what he's talking about, actually. But all that, I mean, I think can only be done by trying to see what kind of experience does he have in mind, what kind of attitude is there, what does he think of when he thinks that the, let's say, central challenge of our lives is somehow to accept and take over our historical finitude and choose our heroes, as he puts it. I mean, that's his picture. Then we can look at that picture. What kinds of motives are at play when he says these kinds of things? Why would it be so important that I choose these ideals? And of course, there is Heidegger's whole picture of Dasein's historical essence behind it. So, and then we have certain motives that I don't think in Heidegger himself, a certain drive, I think, to believe that all is really in the end about gaining a certain transparent, let's say, collective identity, which I find very problematic, and exactly because that kind of desire drives so much of what he says. He doesn't really, I think, understand what it's all about. I think his analysis of Das Mann only go halfway, which is exactly why the analysis of authenticity is so close to it, frighteningly close, actually. And about Paul Virilio, I have no clue what he's talking about. So,
in a way.
So there is still, as it were, no, I think, point in trying to compare them or say who is right, because perhaps he's right, perhaps he's saying something perfectly meaningful. I don't know, but we would have to follow him and see what he is actually trying to do.
To be honest, in fact, when I read that counterintuitive argument by Paul Virno, sorry, not Virilio, but Paolo Virno, the Italian philosopher. I think that was actually the first time I understood this equation of finitude, anxiety, authenticity.
Okay.
Of course, because when he said that even an immortal person can be authentic, I tried to imagine immortality and maybe the boredom and the fact that you're never going to die. And I thought, I mean, in a way, there is a certain loss of authenticity if we also use the word authentic in a non-normative sense, in a way that I can allow for there to be authentic criminal, there to be authentic, again under the same category, authentic sadist, authentic saint. All of these roles acquire a certain urgency for a person who has a better understanding of his finitude, which probably if you were immortal you would not have. But insofar as this whole claim was something which Heidegger reached based on a phenomenological investigation, it is somehow a subjectivist claim which many people may relate to, but they may relate to insofar as they may misunderstand even how he uses words like authentic. I mean, where would you place all this talk of authenticity? Is it already more of a concern of this later phase of Heidegger, where he's engaged in the hermeneutic deconstructive pursuit, or do you think it belongs to the early Heidegger, or it is?
No, I think it's a concern that goes all the way through from beginning to end. It just changes form, I would say. That in the early Heidegger, the idea is basically that that we're living in these kinds of historical finite contexts of meaning, but since we are so frightened of this finitude, of this groundlessness of these contexts, we deny it in different way. We deny it and try to give different kinds of metaphysical interpretations of how the world, how life is somehow grounded in basic universal principles or beings or different sorts. So we deny this finitude and try to think up different metaphysical constructions that cover it up. And then the idea is that authenticity is this movement by which we accept this finite predicament and somehow live with it. That is to say, we accept that this is just a final constellation of meaning that we take over and live through. And that's basically what happens in all of the early Heidegger. Then in the later Heidegger, the perspective changes a bit, because he thinks that the world itself, the historical world itself, it can be more or less laden with meaning. He thinks that the history of Western philosophy is such that the fundamental understanding of the openness of being has been such that we have lost, let's say, our basic sense of how the world is finitely constituted. And this means that these worlds have lost their power to bind us. So the task of the later Heidegger and of thinking in his later work is to work on this re-establishment of a kind of meaningful, binding historical world on the basis of an insight into the finitude of being. So that's basically the work, the task of the thinker. So you cannot be authentic. You cannot be authentic if there is no world to accept, to live into, as it were. So the perspective changes from the individual struggling to become authentic to the task of working on somehow establishing or preparing the way for a new kind of historical world or historical epochal being.
And here he brings in these new concepts like the event, or terms which he also uses in maybe a similar line, the clearing.
Yes.
Also,
and the history of being.
All the etymological exercises which he engages in.
Yes.
So then the question comes regarding the validity of this variety of investigation, and I would use George Steiner's words vis-a-vis this, and that is whether a meditation on etymology can go upstream in time. And of course there's this employment of maybe a historical poem, a saying, maybe a line by Leibniz, the famous "nothing is without a reason" in the Principle of Reason series of lecture. And then you take this as an embryonic indication that lets you confirm, again in George Steiner's word, or spell out that possibility of meaning which this, explication opens up. Now to get back to this same sentence again, can meditation on etymology go upstream in time? And to me, when I saw the question first, I thought, of course not. There is no way that we can hope for such a thing. Because if you look at Heidegger's prose itself, we have an instance of a person who uses and abuses terms that even in his own time had different senses in other people's texts. So to imagine that I can go back to a historical text, draw out sentences, syllables, phrases, and assume that first of all there is some sort of originary, meaning there that I can reveal by, the sort of investigation that he employs. It's surely impossible. Like, at any given time, people use words and sentences in so many different ways. And Heidegger's prose abuses German in a unique style that I think again George Steiner called the idiolect. And that alone should be a refutation of this project, where one can hope that, there is this wellspring of meaning in, let's say, this or that Greek phrase. And again, you had this description of what may be binding or not. There is again a presupposition that there was ever a state where things were binding and that it's somehow lost. Do you have any personal opinions on this etymological, or what you in fact have called the acts of philological violence, where, for example, he links ta phenomena to ta onta?
Yeah. Well, I can admit that, Heidegger's use in many later texts of etymology is not, I think it's one of the weaker aspects of his later thinking. I do think that sometimes he actually is able to bring some element, some aspect of a text to light by doing that. Many other times it's really more it brings more unclarity than clarity. And I do think that sometimes you can use these kinds of, you can go back, you can look at a word, look at its literal meanings, and it can bring out something in a phenomenon. At least it can set your fantasy going, which is sometimes quite healthy. But of course, the way he uses it is I think often a bit problematic, because it seems to me that what he's kind of pushed towards this approach by his in renouncing phenomenology. He needs some kind of concreteness in his historical investigations, and I do think that what happens here is that he often has his basic figure of thought, the being, the openness of being. He has this structure ready, and then he keeps finding it again and again in different things, in different texts, which then are such that these etymologies are taken to somehow confirm this schema that is already there, that he doesn't establish, I think, through etymologies, but it's already there as it were big prejudice guiding his etymological investigations. So I don't think, but then of course sometimes I do think that he is able to find something interesting and somehow, and sometimes he of course by focusing on the literal meanings, he is able to bring certain words alive again. They kind of lose some of the meanings that have been following them through the history and become fresh again.
Fresh again.
By kind of recalling this concreteness or some old meaning aspects.
Because I was thinking of coming up with a way of characterizing this whole enterprise, and I thought that probably we can say that Heidegger molests a lot of historical tradition, texts, literature, to squeeze out of them the conclusion that he wishes for.
Yeah.
And just to end on a jocular tone.
But I would like, before you end, I would like to say that I
wanted to say that you point out that there are times where this molestation is productive because it reveals insights that were forgotten. But
no, I would like to say that I think that Heidegger is sometimes, at least the early Heidegger, I think it is one of the best philosophers of history in the sense that he, I mean, mostly when we read the history of philosophy, it's very, for example, when it concerns the ancient Greeks, I mean, often it's really, you really have a sense that not just Russell, but many books for a long time do not really, or very seldom, bring a life to this old text and show them in their perhaps also somehow quite unsettling character in the way they deviate from our current conceptions and so on. And I think that the early Heidegger, exactly through his phenomenological perspective, often is able to make them come alive again and say, well, what is this experience that Aristotle, that function as the paradigm of Aristotle's analysis, for example, and by finding that he suddenly sheds light on and kind of reorganizes everything that goes on there. So I think that sometimes he or you could even say that Heidegger opens up a way of doing the history of philosophy that it has been extremely influential, that has made it interesting again. But on the other hand, sometimes he is, of course, really burying the thinkers that he is explicating because they just become examples of his own grand history and lose all their voice and individuality. So it's very, very double-edged.
So a certain playfulness which at times becomes creative, which otherwise was not present in histories of philosophy, where they would in a very turgid manner just list an account of what this thinker thought, that thinker thought. But here we go back, and even if we misread, that misreading at times reveals things that people took for granted or were not aware of.
Yes, and the important thing that in the best of cases it opens up a perspective that is genuinely philosophically interesting in relation to our times. I mean, that's, I think, the strength of Heidegger's readings. I mean, it doesn't happen always, but I do think that many of the early things are such. Yeah.
All right. To end, we can perhaps repeat a humorous line from Saul Bellow's Herzog, where the character Mrs. Herzog, distraught because his wife had left him, writes a letter to Heidegger, asking him, "Dear Dr. Professor Heidegger, I should like to know what you meant by the expression, the fall into the quotidian. When did this fall occur? And where were we standing before the fall?" So, Dr. Westerlund, any clues? How would you think Heidegger would answer that? Or
I think he would say that there were no such point because we had always already fallen. So I don't think we ever fell,
We never
according to Heidegger.
Okay.
There is only the possibility of somehow coming up again on top of it.
Alright, so perhaps we were all standing atop Mount Olympus because it is the Greeks.
Yeah, with the Greeks, but that's another story. That's another story. But as far as authenticity goes,
Okay, we
I
were
think
always
the-
inauthentic.
I think so.
Okay,
I think
thank you
so.
very much, Dr. Westerling, for your
Thank
time.
you, thank you.
And thank you very much for your patience. Well,
Yeah.
Better.
That's good. Yeah. All right.
whew.
Let's see what we can get out of this. Good. I think there were some good like
Instances.
recognizers, how do you say, like the question and the answer. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's gonna be good.
Some happy
I
pictures.
hope we can.
You'll get 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's
All the,
it's 1 hour 30.
Really?